Let's give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to Mr. Neville Isdell.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone. Thank you for being here today. And you know, coming here, I thought about you, and I look here. A lot of you have taken up your time to come here. And what do you want to hear? What did you think you were going to hear? And how, in a way, can I make it in some way different and interesting? Now, I could give you the secret formula, but I don't even know it either, and it's just locked down the road, as you know, in the vault there. I could bore you with going through all of the elements of the turnaround, but then a lot of that's in the book, and then you wouldn't buy the book, so I'm not going to do that either. But what I thought I'd do first, one of the things they say that you don't do in speeches and you don't do when you're doing, writing anything is you don't mix up two different storylines at the same time. But I'm actually going to do that, and it was in the introduction in terms of talking about, social responsibility and accountability for a corporation. So I'm going to mix the two up, and in fact, did that within the book. Just about the book for a second. I mean, first of all, why do you write a book? Well, I guess certainly an autobiography. I guess first of all, it's ego. You got to be honest. You want to write a book. I mean, it's quite neat, to see your book there on a bookshelf. But the genesis of my book was really that I believe in telling stories, and I tell stories, and around dinner parties and all this, and then people said, "You got to write this up. You just got to write a book," which is what I did, and it's there more for, I guess, my family and posterity there than for anything else. But it's been moderately successful, and that feels pretty good too. But what I wanted to capture within that was something that I hope interests all of you, and that is that there is so much opportunity out there in the world if you grab it. And I was one of the lucky people, very lucky people, who managed to get that level of exposure, that level of experience. I have lived literally in 11 countries on 5 different continents over my whole life, most of it in the 43 years with the Coca-Cola company. I never set out to be a lifer. I always thought that I'd move around from company to company, as just about everyone else does, and certainly more so today. But it just worked out. And that gave me a cross-cultural view of the world and of life, which was something else that I wanted to reflect upon as well. And I'm going to leave most of that open to the Q&A, because I find that's much more instructive than trying to lecture you with regard to that. But I wish, quite honestly, that I were 25 years old today, or younger, actually. Because I am very optimistic about tomorrow's world, even about today's world. And I see the new technologies coming along, which are going to enable a speed of change, which is going to radically better the world in the aggregate, because it won't only better the world. And you're going to be part of that. And I envy that. I really envy you that, because I will obviously inevitably not be part of it. But what has sustained me, and I guess advanced my career, is something very simple that I would impart to you, and that is an inquiring mind. Always looking to find out more. One of the things that, if you go through my CV, in retirement now, I am co-chair of a thing called the Investment Climate Facility for Africa, which is about reforming governance in Africa to aid business to develop. I also next month take over as chairman of the US World Wildlife Fund. So I'm now in the NGO world and very worried about species and humanity and the environment. And I'm going to take that over. So I'm actually not retired. I just don't get paid for most of the things I do today. And that continuing exploration is something that I always want to talk about when I talk to a group like you. Your education is not about the completion and the diploma, and I managed to get out of Georgia Tech with, cum laude or whatever. It is that it prepares your mind and it prepares you to go on a total voyage of exploration. And that, in a way, is what my book is and was about. Not explicitly, but implicitly, in terms of this is the way it played out for me. But I talked about optimism, about the world at large. But there's a lot of reason for pessimism as well. The Economist this week quoted some numbers from the research done by the Research Institute of the German Marshall Plan. And if you don't know what the Marshall Plan was, I suggest you look it up, because it was one of the great bequests of the US government in terms of bringing Europe out of the Second World War. It was an amazing, magnanimous gesture on behalf of the US. But their research arm said that in Europe, 76% of people do not believe that capitalism is more than for just a few people. In other words, that it is skewed to a very significant minority and it does not benefit them. That number in the US you might think is different, and it is. And it is lower. But today it is 64%. 6 years ago it was 43%. There's something very threatening happening. The capitalist system, which has been the most successful system with all its flaws, for taking people out of poverty and developing the world at large for the better, is at risk, in my view. Now, that 74% and that 64% don't have an alternative philosophy by and large. They don't have anything to replace it with. But they're unhappy. The spoils are not being spread in the right way. And that is very fertile soil. It's very febrile, very fertile soil for political movements that will undermine what generates growth. And I know people are going to say, well, yeah, but things haven't worked out very well in the last few years. Well, I just want to take you with some other data that is published in The Economist. So we read about food price increases, right? We read about food shortages. That has to tell you that the level of absolute poverty and the level of starvation has increased markedly. Well, the World Bank's numbers actually refute that. And they refute the numbers on poverty were numbers that were put out by the Food and Agriculture Organization, who actually had a number that had been a soaring of poverty between 2005 and 2010. That has been debunked. So that'll be the one that some people have read. But the truth of the matter is this, and I'm going to just read from this. New estimates show that in 2008, the first year of the financed food crisis, both the number and the share of the population living on less than $1.25 a day, which is the dividing line for absolute poverty, and it's done at constant prices, was falling in every part of the world. This was the first instance of declines across the board since the bank started collecting figures in 1981. The estimates now, that was 2008, for 2010 are partial, but the Millennium Development Goals were reached in terms of halving poverty, world poverty, between 1990 and 2015 by 2010. In other words, 5 years early. And it continues at an unabated progress. Africa, and I was brought up there and I still spend a lot of time there, which gets such bad press, undeservedly so, has seen the largest recent turnaround. The only continent where, in fact, the head count rose at a double-digit rate. In other words, it declined at a double-digit rate. The number of people moving out of poverty almost doubled from 1981 to 2005. So those are, if you read the popular press, those are not the numbers that you read. It is about the fact that these crises, and they are crises, are creating more poverty. If you go to Africa today, you're going to see a vibrant market economy in action. You will see entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs may be just single people selling vegetables in the market, but also entrepreneurs who are managing to become wholesalers and manufacturing goods, and even if we're just selling cards for a cell phone. But there's a bustle, there's an entrepreneurship. That's why sub-Saharan Africa GDPs are growing at in excess of 7%, and will, in my view, continue to do so. So what I'm trying to connect here is this disaffection, which in many respects is a Western US disaffection, for the spoils of capitalism and a querying about capitalism that can potentially undermine the very system that has benefited each and every one of us in this room. And maybe you don't identify with that, but it has, it did, and it will, and we need to defend it. Now, there have been bad players. A friend of mine who is a builder. Now, status in society doesn't put builders right at the top. You know, it's plumbers and builders and what have you tend to not be seen around a dinner table. You know, if you're sitting at a dinner table with people 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, you know, they'd say, well, what do you do? And someone would say, I'm a builder. And everyone would say, oh, really? Oh, that's very interesting. And then someone else further down would say, I'm a banker. And people say, oh, you're a banker. Well, it's a bit different today. They say, well, I'm a banker. Everyone says, you're a banker, you know? But the finance industry has clearly let us down, has clearly become, in some instances, casino-like. And to me, when people are talking about investment as bets, like a casino, that tells you there's something wrong with that system. And equally, underneath all of this, there's a change, there's a societal change that we detected at Coke. And you're very much a part of that. It is a far greater demand for values, for looking at people, for looking at institutions, looking at businesses, and looking behind them and saying, what do you stand for? Who are you, what are you, and what do you believe in? And does that match the values that I have and that I hold? And one of the things that we realized was that we were not catching up. We were not ahead of that movement. We weren't thinking about how people perceived the broader company enough and what we did. We were not thinking about how we move things forward in terms of connecting at that level, not just with individual consumers to sell Coca-Cola, but with society as a whole. We didn't think about how important it was to have a social license. That social license has been fundamental to the agreement, the pact between the rent seeker, between the business, and society as a whole, and will continue to be so. And I think the instances that I've quoted, and there are others, of dysfunction are the ones that sow the seeds of the destruction, potentially. So we have to think anew. Businesses have to think anew. NGOs have to think anew. Governments have to think anew. Not only about how they connect with society, but also how they connect together. So the first piece of that puzzle is what I call a triangle of sustainability. And I believe that if governments, civil society, and that's academia, including at NGOs, that's a broad swathe, and business, and I would include bankers in that as well, actually start looking at key areas where they have an impact and work together with regard to solutions. So what do I mean by that? It means that as a business, you have to disagree with Milton Friedman. That's very difficult. He's a giant of economics. And although he's somewhat misquoted, he did talk about the law of the commons, but anyway, he's somewhat misquoted. He is the one who said that the only true purpose of a business is to make a profit for the shareholders. He sometimes had a caveat. That to me has been misconstrued as make a profit for the shareholder this quarter, next quarter, within the time frame of Wall Street, but not within what should be seen as the time frame of a business. The Coca-Cola company is 126 years old now. You've got to think about the next 25 years. You've got to think about how you position yourself. And you've got to think about things in a very different way. You've got to think about where you have a negative footprint, where you're extractive without putting enough back. You're extractive actually by causing a degree of damage. Water would be the one that Coca-Cola is pilloried for taking out and selling, particularly in a plastic bottle. And it is also the one key ingredient that has caused more wars than anything else in history. But if you take the narrow Friedman view of things, that, look, the water's there, they price it to you, you buy it, put a premium on it, make a profit for Wall Street, make a profit for your shareholders, that's fine. It's not fine anymore. Consumers say, no, we want to know what you're doing about water. And as you get that and you become engaged in this whole large water debate, and I'm not going to go into the politics of water, I don't have time for that, but it is a very complex situation. As you get into that more and more, you get pushback from Wall Street. And I, at a particular analyst meeting, got the pushback. And it said to me, one person in the audience said, well, how do you justify spending shareholders' money on all of these water projects that you're doing? What's the yield for the Coca-Cola company? And my answer was very simple. Actually, it was with a Coke, not a Dasani, but I sort of took it. I slowly took a sip and I said, tell me, why do you think I shouldn't be worried about one of my key ingredients? And I never had that question again. But when you start thinking of it in those terms, you adapt, as it were, the Friedman view, because in fact that raw material, that precious thing called water is integral to your long-term sustainability and success. So it has, I call it strategic coherence. It is strategically vital, and therefore spending shareholders' funds for the long-term benefit of the company and also for society is absolutely vital to the survival of the company. And what it does is it not only improves connection with consumers, it not only improves connection in terms of how people rate the company in terms of engagement, society, and values. It does one other very, very powerful thing. And we had the data. Coke has got the data. I don't know the updated, but I'm sure it hasn't changed. Data about what you call engagement. How the people feel when they walk in on Monday morning through the doors down in North Avenue, or in Johannesburg, or in Sydney, or in Dhaka, or wherever. How they feel about the company they work for. And the data that we had in 2004 was, I mean, it was part of the intro. Actually pretty dire. And what happens is that people switch off. They turn the switch. They do what they have to do. I mean, there's interesting things about Coca-Cola. You know, marketing, there's nice challenges. But if you don't feel inherently good about the company you work for, you're not going to deliver the very, very best work and the very best effort. And the numbers, it's not just what I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, but it's a key part of it. There's base research that people say, I now feel much prouder, or actually very proud, working for the Coca-Cola company because of what the company does with regard to water, the leadership position that the company takes. And let me describe that leadership position. It is, by the end of 2015, to be all of the water that is used in the manufacturing process in 1,000 factories around the world will be returned to nature 100% in nature-identical form. It can support aquatic life. That's a massive investment in water treatment. But it means that the old era of saying, well, we take the water, we use it, and we throw it out into the river, are gone. That water is pristine, usable, drinkable. But more than that, saying by 2020, by the sort of projects that Coke undertakes, validated by people like the World Wildlife Fund, my new side, that by 2020, they'll be totally water neutral. In other words, by ameliorating deforestation and paying for that, there is a formula which says so much water has been kept in a pure form, and therefore it's like a carbon offset. It's a water offset. And by doing that, Coke by 2020 will actually have zero imprint on the planet with regard to its manufacturing of the product and the product that is consumed. And then you go a step further. You say, what about my supply chain? If you take it for Coca-Cola, what about the sugar that we buy? Sugar is extremely thirsty crop. And therefore, one of the other things that I undertook in partnership with Cargill, we made investments in R&D. And today, Coca-Cola, not in large quantities, but because it's expensive, but we'll get the cost down, is buying a new strain of sugarcane, which needs 30% less water to grow than normal sugarcane. So there's your connectivity. Here's where you have an imprint. You look after what you do in your own shop, as it were, in your own factories, and then you look at that broader swathe of things. So I don't know what you expected when you came in, if you expected this sort of lecture, rather serious lecture. But this, to me, is how businesses have to evolve. And they're only going to do it by working closely with NGOs. And one of the reasons I'm with the World Wildlife Fund is I believe that there is an absolute need for business to assist NGOs like WWF to be able to have a positive impact. And I could take questions on that later on. But the NGOs realize they don't have the implementing capacity. They don't have the arms and the legs. They don't have 850,000 people working around the world. Coca-Cola does, Unilever does, Walmart does. And the head of WWF just spent 3 days in Bentonville with Walmart on joint programs to look at the footprint that Walmart has and to reduce that as the benefit to society overall. So those are my formal remarks. No Coke commercials, sorry. No entertainment, no formula. But I want you to just, if you go away from here, I'd like you to think about how you become engaged in enhancing those values, how you protect those values. Because I think unless we do that, people are going to query the rightfully tough capitalist system to a degree that we could have some sort of political dysfunction that undermines its ability to take more and more people out of poverty, to make more and more people part of a functioning middle class, to give more and more people the opportunity to come to Georgia Tech. Thank you very much. So there's a couple of mics, I think, around. You can go back to Coca-Cola now. You can talk Coke and ask Coke questions if you want to, if you wish. The only caveat that I'll make is that I don't work for the Coca-Cola company anymore. I retired 3.5 years ago. So current questions, I'm not in management, I'm not on the board. I do other things. So I'm not going to talk currently about Coca-Cola. I can't, and I shouldn't, and I won't, okay? So that I'll duck those, all right? Yeah. Just give me your name and what you're studying, be useful.
My name is Tamim, and I'm a business administration major. My question, and if you're not allowed to answer this, it's okay.
Sorry?
If you're not allowed to answer this, it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Do you get Coke products for the rest of your life for free?
The answer is absolutely yes, and I buy them at Kroger.
Hey, how's it going? Matt Fox, 5th year industrial engineering major. My question is, when you did work for Coca-Cola, what are some of the biggest ways you saw the company evolve over the years?
Well, I think it was the globalization of the company. I joined the company in Zambia, and I remember I was in the Africa group, and I was told, people would say to you anecdotally at the time, because I'm originally Irish, you won't hear it in the accent anymore, but I'm originally Irish, but I was brought up in Africa. There's a ceiling. It's the American ceiling. All the top jobs are held by Americans. That was the conventional wisdom. And I didn't worry me that much because I wasn't anywhere near that level. But there was definitely a ceiling. And if you go back to the last 5 chairmen and CEOs, one was an American, one was a Cuban, one was Australian, I was Irish, and current one is Turkish American. And if you look at the management team down at North Avenue today, the guy who runs Asia is a Colombian, the one who runs Latin America is a Mexican, Europe is there's just been a change, but actually he's British, but before that, up until a week or so ago, a French woman. The chief legal counsel used to be Australian, now he's German. Chief legal counsel of a US corporation, okay? The head of technical is Dutch. Belgium Dutch, actually, Dutch-Belgium. And, so it goes on as you go through it. And what has happened is that as the company has spread out and become truly global in terms of where 80% of the earnings come from outside the US, has just become really global in terms of its reach, in terms of its business. It's become so as part of its management. And I would say it is not there yet as a truly global company, but I would challenge anyone to say there's any company that's more global. And global, you look at the management team. People say, oh, we're truly global, we're in 115 countries, but if you're not global in terms of the mix of the people that you have running the company, you're not truly global. So when you sit around a management meeting, it's the United Nations. You've got the voices from everywhere, and that's really changed. And as I, sometimes going and talking to other companies, I'm struck by the fact that although they have a knowledge of the rest of the world, the cultural antenna are not as strong as the cultural antenna that I think are present in the Coca-Cola company. That answer? Okay.
Hi, I'm right over here. My name is Ross Muhlenberg, and I'm a business administration major. And my question is, you've been talking about globalization. This also pertains to that. When I think of the Coca-Cola company,
Just raise your voice a little.
When I think of the Coca-Cola company, I think of a company that represents globalization. And my question to you is, what do you think is the single greatest challenge to running a worldwide corporation?
Well, the single biggest challenge is always getting really talented people. It really is. And that's what it should be about, because at the end of the day, you are about the type of people that you employ and also how you train and manage them. That to me is always number one. The second is, I think, the challenge today, which I have just talked about, and that is how we interact with society and how we are perceived by society. And that to me, that whole value-based judgment area and what you stand for is the second one. And I know that Muhtar spends what some might even say a disproportionate amount of time in that area, because he understands that's part of it. And it's also understanding what the currents are and what the undercurrents are. And just it wasn't in your question, but globalization in a way has got a little bit of a bad name, and it's reflective in those numbers that I quoted earlier. That's all part of that equation. It's fear of loss of jobs, it's fear of China and loss of jobs to China. And it's, as always, I mean, free trade has always been feared, because free trade is seen as, what job going there and going away somewhere else. And it's very difficult to sit and argue with a Lou Dobbs who will give you an example of factories closing down and going to China and say, well, there you are, free trade doesn't work. And then you're there saying, well, look, I'd like to actually explain to you the laws of comparative advantage in economics. That doesn't get through to the average guy. It doesn't work. But the economics of free trade are still the same. It's still all part of that whole system. And I think business has a role in being able to try and proselytize that as well. But that's not the biggest challenge. It was just something I also wanted to comment on.
Hi, my name is Nicole Reardon. I'm a fourth-year management student, and I'm originally from Strangford, which makes us neighbors. My question is, last week our speaker talked a lot about taking risk, and I was wondering what advice you would have to give us about really the relationship between risk and reward and when to take risks.
The first thing I do is say he's right. I agree with him. And I'll give you a personal story. I was in Australia. I was the region manager for Australia. I was already being told that within 9 months I was going to take over the division. I was going to be promoted. And the company went into a joint venture with its bottler in the Philippines. Was losing money. and it had a 30% share against Pepsi was 70%. The relationship between that bottler and the Coca-Cola company was not particularly good, or had been very bad. But they managed to construct a joint venture where they recapitalized the business. Coke got 30% equity, so it's different 30%, the share, but got 30% equity. And got the right to put in the president and general manager, plus also 2 other positions, treasurer and finance officer. And and the rest of it was this organization that wasn't working. I mean, was still losing share, losing money. So I went and I asked people, do you think I should do this job? You're crazy. You're crazy. That's never going to work. That is the most ridiculous. Look at the situation. And I had to technically leave the company and go on a secondment. The only guarantee I was getting was they would rehire me in the position I was in when I left. So it'd be 4 years given up, and probably I'd failed. So there wouldn't, it was the end of my career. And senior people, the company people, senior to me said, look, there'd been a management change, and so they were also saying that your protector's gone, as it were. This is a message. They're shoving you out. This is a message. But just don't do that. Hang on where you are. You've got a promotion coming. Just don't do it. I went there. I spent a week there. I looked at it, and I said, yeah, boy, it's a mess. This could be fun. I like messes. I think I could do this. And I went there, and 4 years later, we outsold Pepsi 70-30. It made my career. I wasn't offered the job necessarily because they thought I was the best person for the job, because there were 7 other people that turned it down before me. Which means that 7 other people they thought were better than I was at doing it, okay? All right? But I'm the dummy who said, okay, yeah, I'm up for it. So that's my view. That's a real personal story. That was the biggest jump in advance in my career. And there's risk. But I said to myself, I was young enough. I was 37, 36, 37. It doesn't work. I'll get the experience. I think I could find something else. I've got enough confidence to do that. I had no view that I wanted to fail, obviously. But, yeah, if that was it, I could do it. So I think the people, just about every person who has been successful has taken risk. It's linear success. It doesn't happen. And also, they've made mistakes. They've messed up, and they've. I'm not going to tell you about my mistakes now, but no, they're there. We all make them, and in fact, we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes, as well. I would say that as something else. But you've got to be honest with yourself and analyze why you screwed up as well, when you do. Another mic. Up at the back on the right. Yep.
Hello, my name is Jill Knight, and I actually graduated with my MBA last year. So I'm just haunting the place now. So I wanted to ask you, back when you started with Coca-Cola, it was still sort of a norm, at least here in the U.S., to stay with the same company for 40 years. And that obviously isn't the norm these days. Most people get is usually about 10 years. So I was wondering if, looking back on your career, and it sort of ties into what you were just talking about, is do you wish you had left Coca-Cola and gone to a different industry or to a different company within the industry? Or are you glad that you stayed at Coca-Cola for the long haul?
No, I'm glad I stayed at Coca-Cola. Look, I mean, the reality is that there's a breed called headhunters out there. And I was, I was headhunted a few times. I looked at other opportunities. And some of them were, quite seductive, and some of them were quite interesting. But at the end of the day, I just decided that actually I was better off in Coca-Cola. Because, I've been very lucky. The opportunities have come for me at a young age, and I've been able to grab them. So I looked outside, and I looked seriously outside. And I got close sometimes, and then said, nah, I think if I weigh one up against the other, I'm going to stay. I don't anticipate that's going to happen to maybe any of you here or too many of you. You see, that's not a goal. To have the goal that you're going to stay with one company the rest of your life, that's not a good goal. Then all you do is you avoid getting into trouble so that you can stay there. That's not motivating. That's not rewarding, and to me is just not even an objective. So staying with one company for 43 years is an accident of continually analyzing where you are and what you're doing. Okay, and just a happy accident. Okay? And don't forget, I did come back for retirement, so I had to be re-recruited. Actually, funny story. So I'm in Barbados, retired. That's my base. I'm Irish, so to come back and run the Coca-Cola company, I need a work permit, and I got to go to the U.S. Embassy in Barbados and get the work permit, fill in the forms, what have you. And you go there and the interview process. And of course, this is post 9/11, so there's this great big bulletproof glass thing with microphones, and you stand there, and the guy's behind it, and so everyone can hear what's being said, 2 along and 3 along, what have you. And this big birdie guy says to me behind it, he says, so why you? Why should I approve this? He said, aren't there any Americans that are good enough to run the Coca-Cola company? And I said to him, I said, well, I said the only thing I can say is I don't know, because the board of directors offered me the job, and they're all Americans. And he looked at me as if to say, smart ass. He looked at me, and anyway, stamped it, and that was it. I got my work permit. But anyway, there we go.
Hi, my name is Erica. I'm also a recent graduate in industrial engineering. So my question is related to talking about social responsibility and its importance to Coca-Cola. I'm not sure, this is my question, but I would assume perhaps someone in India would view social responsibility differently than someone in Europe. But I'm not sure. What is your opinion? It's kind of a two-part question. And then the second part is, how do you feel with all of the global integrations that were just recently announced? Do you think that will help or hinder Coca-Cola's social responsibility vision?
Well, I think in terms of issues, the issues are not necessarily different, but around the world, but always between India and the Western world. But I think they're much more granular because people are worried more about the day-to-day than about the policy and the philosophy and the like. So I think you're dealing at a governmental level in India, you're dealing the same way, policy frameworks, etc. But in terms of individual consumers, different level of engagement in the marketplace, different exposure to the rest of the world, more basic about me today rather than not just about me today, but what about tomorrow? Okay, so that difference is there, but sometimes those come bang together. If you see in China today, and it happens in India as well, but in China, protests about polluted rivers, protests about land being taken away, and therefore it actually becomes real in terms of matching the environmental pressure against corporations at an Indian level as it does on a global level. And of course, now with the internet and everything, those two connect. And someone wants to say, well, but didn't Coke get into all sorts of trouble about a plant in India by taking the water? And I around at that time, so I can comment about it. Well, all I can say is that we closed the plant, and you'll still read on the internet about depletion of water from that particular area. The rate of decline, this was in my period of time, as I know the data, of that aquifer accelerated after the plant was closed, because actually the Coke plant was 1% of the offtake of the aquifer, and the real issue was agriculture and irrigation. But the penalty for being Coca-Cola, I mean, there's a benefit to being Coca-Cola. Immediately recognized, it opens doors, does all sorts of things. But boy, does it get blamed for all sorts of things it doesn't do. And if you want to make a point, you want to get attention, you choose the big brand. You go. And I'd rather it was that way than we were inconsequential, unknown, and irrelevant. Okay? Yep.
Hi, I'm Michael Carbonell. I'm a mechanical engineering master's student. When I was traveling through the rainforest in South America, I came across a town, and maybe one of the very few things that I recognize from, I guess, the more modern world would be a Coca-Cola sign. And I was just curious as to, was that a goal of the company to get basically global penetration of your product? And if so, was that for financial reasons, or were there other motives in that?
Yes, it was a goal, and yes, it was for financial reasons, because that's what the business was. And then how you do it then comes into values and what have you. But at those early stages, it was getting the stakes in the ground, getting out there and getting to consumers, because at the end of the day, we're about refreshing the whole world. So you want to get out to the most extreme places. And I mean, when I was working in Zambia, I remember meeting missionaries, so it'd be a little bit like you, and they would say, well, how on earth I got to this remote village, and here's a Coke sign, and there's some guy selling Coca-Cola. Well, the interesting piece about how that happened, or why that happens, is, first of all, Coke had thought all the way through how you get it out there, and you get it out through local people. So that sign, in the Africa example, okay, what we did was, if you bought 10 cases of product, we would give you a free metal sign and 6 nails. Not even a hammer, 6 nails. And off you'd go. And I've got old photographs of the guys with this dugout canoe with 10 cases of Coke piled up, and there they are, off up the canal, off back with their metal sign to go and put it up there to impress the missionary at the end of it. But apart from that, sort of the flippant side of that, the why it works is everyone along that chain, from the Coca-Cola company down on North Avenue to the guy with the little mud hut up in the middle of nowhere in Zambia, makes money along the way. And the best example of that working, I mean, capitalism working positively, is the cell phone. It's exactly the same. When someone dreamt up, the pay as you go, buying the card, that's fundamentally changed Africa. Fundamentally changed Africa. The cell phone usage is amazing. It has disaggregated some of these rapacious merchants who were able to, pay the fishermen very little for their fish. The fisherman now has got a catch. He phones up directly into someone who wants the fish in the store, and he can get a better price. But what it's done is it's also free. There are people in that system as well. To the guy who's selling, a minute of time, a little chip with a minute of time, and he's got a little business out of it. So I talk about this with regard to the World Wildlife Fund, or I talked to Helene Gale about it with regard to care. If you're trying to get antiretrovirals out there, if you're trying to get, malaria, I've got a malaria nets program in Zambia, which I personally fund. But if you're trying to get nets out there, you need to have some money along the way for people to be able to benefit from that. Otherwise, you get, and I have photographs of this, with malaria nets distributed through governments. And there's a video of that I got on this one, where there's this huge government warehouse full of malaria nets, and the villagers aren't using any nets. And the interview with the government bureaucrat was, well, why aren't the nets out there? Well, no one comes to get them. Not my job, put it out there. Whereas if you were to just get that out into stores and someone were to charge a nominal amount of money for that, that would get the distribution out there, and they'd merchandise it and they'd market it, and you'd get it out there and you'd save lives. So again, endorsing capitalism, but part of it, therefore, is people will then make a few pennies in terms of being able to go in their dugout canoe, and that's why you go somewhere in the wilds of the Amazon. That person's making a little bit of money for their family out of Coca-Cola, and you get a Coke, probably not a cold one, but you get a Coke anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Alexandria Skeet, and I'm a fifth-year industrial engineer. I had a question. You said that education is not about diploma, but it's about exploration. And I was wondering if it was exploration that kind of led you to go back and work for Coke again, or I was wondering what exactly brought you out of retirement, because it's not something that people necessarily usually do.
Yeah. I've got a little. I'll tell you the story basically, because logic would dictate that it's something that why would I do it? And there was a buzz around that something was going to happen. So it wasn't something that was a total surprise when the phone rang and they said, "We'd like you to throw your hat in the ring to come back." But I talked to my wife about it, two of us, and I said, look, don't worry, I'm not going to do this. This is crazy. I mean, here I am. I was 61. I'm in retirement. We've got it all set up, and we had planned it. Because we also have a house in France, and we spend summer in France. And why on earth would I want to do it? And I'm going to work 7 days a week. I mean, it's a really stressful job. You look at photographs of me when I was running Coke. A, I was about 15 pounds heavier, and B, I looked pretty darn tired. Okay, the stresses of that job are immense. No one really realizes the stresses. It's on all the time, okay? And I knew that, and I said, well, why would I want to do that? So then, of course, actually the offer came. It wasn't just a rumor, the offer came. And I got the phone call, and I said, well, don't worry, I'm going to phone them back. I said I'd think about it, but I'm not going to do it. So logic, good logic, sound logic dictates. And then she would say to me, well, have you phoned Coke? No, I'm going to think about it. I'll phone them tomorrow. Sleep on it one more night. And, I kept sleeping on it, and then we get to deadline time. And then I woke up, and I had to say to her, I'm going to go do it. And her first words were, you're what? And what happened was this, and I had been asking myself the wrong question. The question I've been asking myself was, why would I want to do this for all the reasons that I've just given? I mean, it doesn't make sense, okay? But the right question was, can I live with myself for the rest of my life when I have ducked the ultimate challenge? And if you're all about challenge and you're all about doing things, when I looked in the mirror, it was, you know what? I'm going to regret not doing this. I got to go do it. In many respects, I wish it hadn't happened. It worked out very well for me, but that's beside the point. But it's just this, this drive. I mean, why am I now taking on the chairmanship of the World Wildlife Fund? I'll be 3 weeks in the bush in Africa with a group of people looking at things, because it's about growth, and it's also about intellectual growth. In fact, talking to an old Coke guy here, to Jim down here, who retired 18 months ago. Jim is still engaged and doing things. I see a huge difference in people who retire and try and live their life on the golf course, or no intellectual engagement, And to me, you've got to be intellectually engaged, trying to educate yourself, find new things to do for all of your life. And that means you've got to keep working, basically, even for no money. But that to me is what's rewarding, and I think that's what I think in the aggregate it keeps you younger. I think we're going to actually go a couple more. Okay, that's fine. I'm okay. I'm just trying to follow your rules, you see. Yeah, where you go? Okay.
My name is Mike. I'm a PhD student here in biomedical engineering. I really appreciated your commentary on social responsibility. I would imagine one big problem for Coke moving forward is the implication of soft drinks and carbonated soft drinks in the obesity epidemic. So I'm curious as to your take on whether Coke sees that there may be a role for social responsibility in this regard, and maybe how they might approach that issue moving forward.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things behind the development of Coke Zero. I mean, I don't want to go into defense mode, as it were, but you look at the initiatives that Coke has gone up with. Smaller, you see a lot of smaller packages. So downsizing packs. This is not Mayor Bloomberg's another issue. To packs, but also major push behind diet soft drinks. So there's a huge opportunity for the Coca-Cola company, because Coke Zero, Diet Coke, we can give the consumers not one calorie, and you can be hydrated in the best possible way. And Zero has been a huge success around the world. We launched it in 2005 because, in fact, we used the Coke formula. The Coke formula is not in Diet Coke, and that's meant that the mother lode is there, and it tastes as close to Coke as we can get it. So I don't think that we have to be defensive with regard to that. And the truth of the matter is that diet soft drinks have gone from 31% of sales to 42% of sales over the last 10 years. And actually, the in the United States and also in New York, full sugar, full calorie Coca-Cola has declined. And this is as an individual citizen. This is not representing the Coca-Cola company. I don't quite get it that you use 10-year growth in obesity data and full calorie is actually going down. There's other things that are involved. And I think what we haven't done, and this is where Coke then has to get big, and that's what they're doing. Try to get people to look at the issue overall. Because the other data point is over the last 10 years, children are spending 13% less time on physical activity. And at the end of the day, it's about calories in, calories out. I mean, it's just simple. I got heavy by not exercising and eating too much when I was head of Coke, and afterwards I changed it around. I go to the gym, I get fit, and I eat better. And that's the equation, and we've got to try and think about it holistically. So that's very difficult to do. And again, it's easy. You pick Coke, and that's it. I mean, if Coke didn't exist, I'm not sure what the calorie count difference would be every day for the average American, but it wouldn't be very different. I can tell you that. If you banned it completely, it wouldn't. Coke and Pepsi and all carbonated soft drinks. So. We're always looking for simple solutions to complex problems. There are no simple solutions to complex problems. But people find it very difficult to deal with the complexity of it. That's the issue. This will be our last question. Okay.
Russell to Trump. I'm a grad student in building construction. Given the geographic...
Oh, you're a builder. You're better than a banker. That's good.
I'm also an Army officer. So, given the geographic dispersion and the size of Coca-Cola, can you speak on some of the challenges for maintaining unity of effort throughout the company, specifically delivering the objectives from the top all the way down to the ground level without losing the intent and the values of the corporation as a whole?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that you have a very clear coherent strategy, which, and in the instance of the strategy in place now, we did use the whole of the global system in terms of developing it. And that's a long story about how we did that. But clarity of strategy, maintaining that strategy, and therefore, and also researching against how people feel about it and what's wrong and updating it. I mean, the strategy that I put in 05, Muhtar is updated, but the core is still the same. In fact, it's more of a managerial thing than it is about a global thing. Because if you've got that coherence of strategy, and you adapt it, by the way, there are things that are more important in other parts of the world than one to the other. But if the core of it has that integrity, and you keep it going for a lot length of time, people understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and that drives behavior, and it drives consistency of behavior. That's why I talk about strategic coherence. And one of the worst things that happens is that when managements change, strategy changes, and that throws organizations out completely. People want to put their own stamp on it, and Muhtar my successor was part of developing the strategy. And if you look at it, it's fundamentally the same strategy, and it's been out there now 9 years, and he's taken it out as a vision to 2020. So people know, where we're going. And I'll give you another example of how even those buzzwords of what you do are very important. General Motors, I'm on the board of General Motors, and I was on the board of General Motors at the time of the bankruptcy. So I've been pre-bankruptcy and post-bankruptcy. A whole lot of things that General Motors did badly, but one of the things it was run too much by the finance types. And it was all about the bucket and the bottom line and what fell in the bucket. So what did you do? You put a plastic piece in instead of something that was metal, and you saved 25 cents, and therefore you cut your costs. The consumer looked at it and said, yeah, I'm not going to buy that car. Okay? That's part of the problem, a micro thing. So the overarching statement about what the new GM is all about is we design, we build, and we sell the world's best cars. It's all about the car. It's all about the consumer. It's nothing about what Wall Street wants, which is the profit. Now, those metrics are there, but that's not what we're all about. Because unless we design, build, and sell the world's best cars, nothing's going to fall in the bucket, the money bucket. If you do that superbly well, it falls in the money bucket. Okay? And the companies that lose it, I would argue that Toyota, one of their problems, because superb organization, all about quality, all about the car, everything. And all of a sudden, they decided they wanted to be the world's biggest car company. And it's what I call the Monday morning meeting question. And it used to be about what were the quality numbers. They assumed that that was there. But the real question became, how many cars did you sell last week? So then you start cutting corners on all the other things. So it's integrity of strategy and focus on what really matters and focus what's right for the consumer. And then the geography really doesn't matter. Then it's tweaks, nuances, cultural differences, which you can manage within that. Okay.
Mr. Isdell, thanks for coming to Georgia Tech.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.